it's an SF project, and they want us to see how, like for example, you develop material or whatever it is in the lab, and how to implement, how to jump from the lab to industry implementation. So they want us to learn how all the chain works from industry to, I don't know, let's say if you work with concrete.
Okay.
So how everything works, how concrete or new technology come to, let's say DOT or spec or whatever,
Right. Okay.
and who influences on decision making, who buy the product, what are the flow money, what is the actual real need in the industry. Like
Okay.
according to, for example, we develop something in the lab. It doesn't mean like there is a need in the industry.
Right.
Real. That's
Right.
why we need to
Right.
know this. If there is
Yes.
any fit for like new product, specific product in the industry, in the
Yep.
market.
Okay. So, which that's a it's a that's a great question because the there's two approaches, and not to age myself too much, but in the late 50s, early 60s, it was primarily driven by things being developed in the laboratory. And what I mean by that is a chemist might stumble onto something,
Okay.
and he would say, okay, he would then approach the marketing department and say, hey, I developed this new thing. Do you think you can go out and find a market for it? Which is somewhat not necessarily obvious, but that's one way that it was primarily going. It was primarily developed that way. And there was a kind of a shift, if you will. There's a whole other market segment that looks at trying to say, okay, what does the customer need? How can we anticipate what the customer wants? And then go back to the laboratory and see if we can develop something to match their needs and wants. There's a difference between needs and wants. I like to describe wants as a teenager. Okay, and a teenager is someone that wants everything immediately and for it to cost nothing, and they reserve the right to change their mind at any time. Most customers are exactly the same way. They reserve the right to change their mind at any time, but they, at least, you bring definition to a project, whatever you're trying to accomplish, by saying, what is it that you want, and bring definition to that. When do you want it, and bring definition to that. And how much are you willing to pay for it, bringing definition to that. An example is this: very seldom can you optimize all three.
Okay.
Because, and as an example, FedEx, DHL, and other companies would not be in business, and they say it in their advertising or their marketing documents that says, hey, when it needs to be there, when it just needs to be there is one of the taglines in their advertisements. The point is that if you want to post a letter, if you would have thought about it beforehand, you would have sent it a week before it needed to be there. Okay? But instead, you wait until the day before, and now you're in the position of having to pay more to accomplish getting the letter there. So what I'm just trying to say is that we've just had a discussion about optimizing those three things that define a project of what do you want, when do you want it, and how much are you willing to pay for it. So, so the question is if you're intense on evaluating a person and their performance and say, well, did you get the letter there? Yes, I did. But I spent a little more for it. Well, so do you find fault with them because they, or do you say, hey, I got it there. So I had to spend a little more, but if you will, the judgment was it is I thought it needed to be there on time, so that's why I spent more money.
Okay.
How
Okay?
we can relate it to concrete industry?
So how we can relate it to the concrete industry is, what does the customer need? I think that's the preferred way to go, because why invent something that's not needed by the customer? I think there's also a perception that says the customer didn't know that they needed it. So it's a matter of perception to say, hey, and creating the need and the want for something that, if you will, hasn't quite been invented. Okay? An example is, and I didn't grow up on an iPhone.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's a recent invention. But what I always needed is a better, quicker means to communicate. So, since I've always recognized that need, the iPhone fulfills that need for me, as an example. Okay? So, I've always had that issue of trying to communicate with someone, and now I can do it instantaneously. It's great. So I'm just citing that as an example. I knew I had a need, but I didn't have anyone with an inventive, innovative approach trying to say, hey, if someone would have come to me and said, do you need a small thing to put in your hand? No. I don't. And I'm going to carry that around? No.
Yeah.
So I think within the concrete industry, there's, I think you have to have a certain amount of courage of your convictions, and you need to.
But who you have to convince?
Yes. Well, there's a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders along the way. In my own experience, we developed it's a matter of how the organization fosters that development. And so my own experience was 3 PhDs and myself got together, and they had a need, I had an idea, and we put it together and developed a new product. And the toughest customers sometimes to convince are your own internal management. That because there's internal competition for money and resources to say, well, do we want to develop this product, or do we want to develop another product? How well can you project what's going to happen is part of the competition.
Okay. Well, for example, if we want to convince DOT, somebody, who it should be, what the person should be to
Well,
convince?
that's an interesting question, because my experience is that it's like ivory soap. 99.996% can say no. So you have to find the one person that can say yes. Usually that's a top-down decision,
Okay.
meaning you have to go high enough for what I colloquially call a rafter shot. You have to shoot up, and then it'll filter down. That's somewhat of a Western way of thinking, and a more Eastern way of thinking is to work from the bottom up.
Okay.
So Eastern or Western?
Well,
think.
I think
Eastern,
it's,
what works in our field?
both of them work, but particularly in the U.S., a top-down works. It's not right or wrong.
But
It's
it's
just
how it
different.
is, yeah.
It's just different. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have to be sympathetic to the organization to understand how the organization works.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is the Eastern versus Western mentality is distinctively different in that regard. Mostly what works with an Eastern mentality, and I mean Eastern, and if Eastern thought is more of a bottom-up approach to convincing, because their perspective is, that's why these people are working for me, because I trust them. So they filter things out before it gets to me.
Okay.
What is your product? Can you tell us a little bit more about your product? You said 3 people come together and create it.
Well, we developed the macro fiber, which was a chopped polyolefin strand, and there was a microfiber, a polypropylene out there, and so this team of the four of us invented the macro polyolefin fiber. So and that was driven by my experience trying to find out how an alternative to a ferrous metal, if you will, steel fiber, and the need was to find something that was, excuse me, non-conductive. And what happened was specifically, I had a steel fiber slab and it was misting out, and we were welding on the slab and it skip arced across the surface of the slab and ground out about 100 feet away. And in a chemical plant, an air and spark is not a good thing. It can be an explosive environment or something like that. So so I wanted a macro synthetic fiber that was non-conductive. That was the property I was looking for. What I'm trying to say by example is I was looking for a specific behavior with specific characteristics around that.
Okay.
And so again, I wanted something that was strong enough, but I also wanted something that was non-conductive.
What about color? I think your product has different fibers. They have different colors. So
Yes.
what is the color story? Is it like as important? So it just happened, or
It's just one of those things because people think that a gray color will fit in better into the gray concrete.
Leo, I have a question to you.
Yeah.
Who you said like about the color people? Who are those people who?
Well, that can be by the product manufacturer or by interviewing the customer when they say, you know.
Who is the
well,
customer? in
Well,
your
the
case?
customer is many times it's a ready mixer. It can be the owner that says, hey, that's going to look ugly. I want a gray color, but it's a matter of listening.
so color doesn't have any like functional. It's not like you have a filler which is gray already, and you just add it to reduce the cost.
Well, it depends on how you.
So it was customer kind of
Yeah,
need.
it was driven by
By-
it was driven by and there's a difference between a need and a want.
Okay, okay.
A need is a requirement. A want is, well, this will make me happy, but then it becomes a business question. I may want a lot of things, but I only need a few things.
I think you're a perfect candidate for this program, which we are working now for.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah. I'm
because
not trying to dodge the question. I'm trying to say,
well.
I'm trying to be very specific in what I say. So, yeah, because there's the other side of it is when you're a specifier, you have to establish what do I need versus what do I want. Because in other words, if you specify a certain amount of performance and don't say anything about the color, well then you get whatever color is available. Okay. So I mean the great and somewhat the art is when you can meet all of the needs and all of the wants. So not only does it function well,
but do you
but
think?
I really like it too.
But do you think people paid more for the color, or they just thought like, okay, that's nice to have a feature, and they were like
Right.
basically selecting? You would have like 10 fibers, and yours was only colored gray, so they were picking up yours.
It depends on that customer.
Okay.
And
But from your experience, what do you think? Did it play any role? As we said, functionally it's not changing strength. Maybe it's making it a little bit cheaper. Depends on the filler you're using.
Exactly, and it's a matter of again being sensitive to the customer. Now, I think that we it's difficult to assess how many projects we won by having that color and how many projects we lost by having that color. Okay? Because if you have an ultra white cement application, well then, depending on the fiber dosage, if you will, well, how is this going to affect my finish or my surface or whatever? And that depends a lot on the final the final product, and it also depends on how close you look at it. An example is this. I'm saying good 30 years ago, I told a customer that I put fibers in his concrete. We were walking across the slab. I said, well, I put fibers in your concrete. Oh, yeah. So he dropped down on his knees and got his face right down in the next to the concrete. He said, oh, I can see one. I mean, if I would have kept my mouth shut, he never would have seen the fibers. But he looked close and he was able to find the fibers. Now, it didn't kill the project, but it was like, why did I say that to him? I should have just said, okay, just let it go and move on.
But how it happened, that you would, let's say, justify the extra cost, so you will still go for technical benefit, right? Or
right, you've got to do that and say, well, how much is this worth? And then you have to assess by sampling or some other means, well, how many sales are we going to make or not? Because and it's also sensitive to, if you will, product introductions. In other words, it's within the organization you can have, well, and I'm trying to cite this as a simple example. Okay. A company came out with a yellow pad of paper. Well, then the next product might be a blue pad of paper. Okay, so is that a new product or not? Well, what did the customers say? Well, the customers said, we're sick and tired of the yellow pad of paper. We'd really like a blue pad of paper. Okay, we'll give you a blue pad of paper. But you may get some pushback to say, hey, look at now, do we as a manufacturer, do we really want to store two colorants, or do we want to just keep the one? And it depends on our contracts with who's providing us with the yellow color, so on and so forth. So it's not a, and again, that depends on the size of the organization and how their decision making goes and who has the influences to make that happen. So, and there is an old saying here, and there's an old saying that's been around for years, and that is that the customer is king. Well, okay, are you listening to the customer? And there's a difference between listening to the customer and selling the customer. So
what was the major problem you addressed with the product?
Well, with the product we invented, the major issue that we addressed was an alternative to steel fibers was the polyolefin fibers. And we got the same behavior and essentially the same residual strength, et cetera, and so we did a rather rigorous analysis according to a typical marketing term of features, advantages, benefits. We brought definition to that, so we set up somewhat of a chart saying, okay, what are the features of this? And we compared those features to only one other similar product. And the reason for that is because logically you cannot compare three things. I'm not trying to instruct you, I'm trying to say people frequently try to compare more than two things, and they don't understand how to reduce that down to something that is as an engineer, I desire to be very practical. And what I'm trying to say is you can only practically compare two things. If you have three things to compare, you have to compare A and B and A and C. And if you want to compare A, B, and C, you have to go through a rigorous comparison of all the combinations of A, B, and C. And you can only compare two things. So pick an easy one to compare and identify the difference in the features. Okay, this is shaped this way, this one is shaped this way. And it means that all those simplistic things identify the differences between the features of A and B. Okay, so then the next thing is advantages. Well, what's the, so to speak, this is an advantage compared to this. Sometimes it's, and you try to make that neutral to identify those differences that are an advantage. Or my perspective is, this is an advantage. Well, why? And how does this compare? Okay, why is this an advantage? Bring definition to it. And the last being a benefit. In other words, saying, okay, this is what it is. Excuse me, this is what it is. This is an advantage. And now, why is that a benefit to the customer? And why is that a benefit to me? In other words, I can describe what it is, a new product line, okay, and it has this advantages, but if it's of no benefit, you know, so there's a couple of simplistic things to look at, saying, okay, if you keep in mind, so to speak, quality or what it is that you want to accomplish, the project, the schedule, when do you want to accomplish it, and how much are you willing to pay? So the project, schedule, cost, okay? And then you bring definition to the features, advantages, benefits. And then the last thing that you kind of incorporate into all of that is my simple 4 acronym thing is subject, purpose, occasion, audience. So as you present it, you look at it from the standpoint of, okay, let's talk about fibers. Well, why do we want to talk about fibers? That's the purpose. You got to answer that question. When are we going to talk? Well, right now is when we're talking about it. Who's the audience? Well, it's me and you. Okay, so it's time spent bringing definition to that. So when you have this new product that has gone through these things, then you asked me about the DOT. Okay, you define the audience. So now let's bring some definition as to when.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why do we want to talk with them? Okay, and we're going to talk to them about what? New product development. Okay, and here's a little story to back that up somewhat humorously. Okay, and this is my engineer's attempt at humor. Imagine that. So anyway, but when we developed this new product, we went out looking for people to buy, and they said they, so to speak, interviewed a bunch of, went to various engineering firms, websites, and things like that, and they said, well, we're innovative, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge technology, and I was like, yada 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 yada. Okay. And we would go there, and we would say, this is a new product. And, okay. And inevitably, at the end of the presentation, someone in the back row would say, can you give me any history on this? I need a 20-year history before I'm going to commit to using your product. Well, and, you know, so you're in a position of, okay, the customer is still king, but you want to address them and say, well, hey, you know, we don't have a definition for the word new if we had a 20-year history on this. So either you understand the features, advantages, benefits, but if you're going to erect a criteria to evaluate what we said on the basis of 20 years experience, well, guess what? We should have ended the discussion a long time ago. Okay? Because we can't bring definition to the word new unless it is. You know? So so it sounds really dumb to say this, but words have meaning. And if we don't agree on what the words mean, well, then let's iron that out first. So, it's so, again, it was an attempt at humor. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of discussions with DOT or other stakeholders before product was really picking up.
Yeah, well, we went to them, and we went to, and I'll say, the state of South Dakota. It's known as not necessarily in their tagline but you envision it as somewhat of a, or at least it's envisioned in America as being a